That was a really helpful overview. But I'm very conscious of time, getting an opportunity to ask some questions. So, questions, please. Anybody got some questions? We have some people who gave us some questions beforehand, but steady over here.
My name's Sydney Place.
Can you just hold on a second? You'll get to the microphone to come to you.
Can you just make a suggestion, because we have very little time, and I've done these meetings before, that you go, because you've got that microphone as well, that you move the two microphones about so you can follow one question after the other, otherwise is that okay? I know. You're then without a microphone, but never mind. Sorry.
My name's Leslie Kenmore.
Can't hear.
Speaking close to it.
I live on North Road.
You have to speak very much into the microphone, I think. Kiss the microphone.
Better? Yeah, you got me now. My name's Leslie Kenmore, I live on North Road, as do a lot of people who are sitting in this corner here. We live about 30-40 feet from Sydney Road. We weren't even consulted. We found out about this by accident. We weren't even part of the original consultation. When we asked our ward councillor why that was, she said, well, we weren't legally obliged to consult you, so we didn't. In the same consultation, we were told by her that if the traffic backed up outside our house, the trial would not be made permanent, and she promised that. I sent in photographs in the consultation of cars backing up outside our house endlessly. I just want to ask, Sydney Road may now be a livable neighbourhood, but ours is much less livable now because of the displacement of traffic. How is that okay?
When I hear this, I would have been tone deaf if I didn't recognise that livable neighbourhoods has created a lot of anxiety and anger amongst not just the people living around Sydney Road, but in other livable neighbourhoods too. And my overall reflection is, and I have talked to my council colleagues about that, and they acknowledge that, most of these things always happen because of a lack of communication. And the council recognises and will say that to you very openly, that this experience has led them to sort of think very carefully about how consultations are being done. In terms of this direct consultation, why not you, but only the people in Sydney Road? I was a councillor for 10 years. I know that the statutory obligations of a council to consult is often only within a very relatively small neighbourhood. And the council has stuck to its statutory duties. It has done what it should do. And then there's always the question, shall we do something beyond that? Because it might make sense. And then, of course, you very quickly get into the difficulty of how far. A, because it costs money, and B, is where do you draw the line? And therefore, it is, of course, a point of reflection for the council how would they consult in the future better to not have the anger, because guess what? Nobody wants anger, certainly not if you're a politician and want to be elected again. So, it's not because people and my council colleagues are deliberately wanting to create a lot of divisions, but because they have stuck to what they were meant to do, and they have started to talk about livable neighbourhoods in 2020 and have invited all communities, and that would have included you, to come forward and say, we have a problem with traffic here, and we want something to be done about it. The people on Sydney Road have done that. And then following, anybody who said we have got a problem, we want something to change, they were then invited to do design shops, and out of design shops came the designs that have then resulted in what is now there. This is how I understand the process worked. It started quite early on, and again, how many people knew about the design shops? The council has all the data, who they have invited, and how many people were part of that design shop. But it is not that the council has just done something without the input of people. And what happens a lot with all of livable neighbourhoods, there's the people who live in the street and on the street, they like it. The people who drive through it, they don't. So how do we actually deal with that problem? I can only say, since I arrived in Bath now 10 years ago, it's relatively shortly, or 11 years ago, years ago, traffic was already a problem. It remains an increasing problem in the city. It becomes more and more, and doing nothing was not an option. To just sit there and let it be what it is is ultimately not an option for any council. I see you're shaking your head.
We are not people who drive through it.
No, you see it, but generally there is that conflict. And of course you can say, well, we have to create livable neighbourhoods in every part of the city, and this is why the council again has started with a lot of livable neighbourhoods across the city, with also a long-term aim, and that is what it is, but it is also a government aim, and I am ultimately, and I come clean with you on this, and I know you're shaking your head, some of you, and I'm taking that, is that we need to ultimately reduce the volume of motorised traffic in order to get more people to walk and cycle. And I am supporting my council colleagues in that. I absolutely think that when I remember being a councillor 20 years ago, young people wanted to go walk and cycle to school, and they didn't want to. And I was a mother who said it's too dangerous. So it is a chicken and an egg situation, where we have got a lot of cars on the road, children and young people and other people who do not want to drive feel often that it is too dangerous for them to be on the roads, and therefore to try and address that long term, to create safer walking and cycling routes is also a long term effort. But fair enough, I'm going to the next question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Take the lady over here.
Can you hear me clearly?
I can.
Okay, super. First of all, just one quick short point. I live on Sydney Road. I was not consulted before this went ahead. I now go to my next point. My concern is over my personal safety. I live on Sydney Road, walking back at night when it's dark. Now is a very, very quiet street, and on my right there are very few properties. On my left is Sydney Gardens with no fencing, and has a reputation for very much a meeting place. It makes me feel very, very vulnerable, particularly after dark. Now it limits my social activities. This is highlighted particularly by a recent event that happened in the Lansdowne area in the last few days, where a woman was sexually assaulted. I don't know if that's been resolved, but now I'm even more nervous about walking back at dark. And I shouldn't feel like that. When I moved to the property in Sydney Road 20 years ago, I felt a little bit safer because there was traffic around. And that now I feel very, very vulnerable as a woman.
Okay,
Thank you.
But why you weren't consulted, I cannot answer, but I can feed that back. And if we have got to address why you were not consulted about the scheme, I cannot answer that, but I can feed that back, and we can understand why you were left out of the consultation, if that is indeed.
Can we have a raise of hands? It wasn't consulted.
Are there people who say that they live on Sydney Road, they were not consulted? Who live on Sydney Road and were not consulted? You were the only. You live on Sydney Road, you were not consulted. Sorry, I don't know. So, when did you start to be consulted? Only once it was in place. Give me your names and addresses, and I will feed that back and find out why you weren't consulted. I hear what you're saying about your personal safety, and you need to, again, I feed that back.
Hi, I'm Sean McDonald. I live just opposite Trossachs Drive, so about 100 metres outside the trial area. To the vicar, if you can make the miracle happen of getting this decision reversed, I'm sure we'll all come every Sunday. Just as a basic piece, The co-design workshop was 39 residents that participated in that. So the problem statement that was created by 39 residents and the potential solutions. My question is about Councillor Elliott's stance on looking at the data in terms of making a decision as to whether this proceeded or not. So he said that he thought his role was to ensure that the basis for the objections were valid. To me, that sort of gives a sense of bias towards looking for holes in people's opinions. I think it would be a much more proactive decision-making process if you'd actually look for facts and evidence that support the benefits that this scheme is supposed to be delivering to the broader community of Bath rather than just a number of residents. So I'd be interested, my question essentially is, what's your view on the democratic process that this has followed, and do you believe that this is democracy in action?
So, as I've said, around the consultation, obviously with the exception of 2 people, the Council has done its statutory consultation as it's required to do, and it's set out by what the Council has to do. That is itself the democracy that works in this country. We are a mature democracy, and you know, as I said, on Sydney Road itself, although there's some objections, but I've also had people who wrote to me today who said they didn't dare to come because they were in a minority and they would not be listened.
Oh, we're so That's outrageous.
And we are a mature democracy in which we also protect minorities. So if everything was just the majority's decision, I remember that during Brexit, and a lot of people were on my side during Brexit, and people said, we voted to leave the European Union and now you need to go and our instructions. We are a representative democracy. You're voting in regular periods, you can make your frustration heard in elections, but while we are elected, we are making decisions that we think are for the long-term good for our communities. Nobody is elected, at least not that anybody that I know, who might differ politically on opinions, but we don't go out open eyes and want to make a decision that is a really bad decision. The Council has set out why they've consulted on the LTNs. Communities could come forward and say they wanted it. On Sydney Road, 70% of people wanted it. There's, of course, also a minority who didn't want it. And this is what the Council acted on.
Wera.
Can't hear.
The Council set out, I'm not the Council. Look, I'm sort of sitting here and I'm listening to what you say. I have reported back to the Council many times. I'm reporting back to what the Council has as an answer to how they have consulted. I'm not here to split myself from your opinion. I'm listening, but I'm also trying to explain how the process has been reported to me, and you're asking me about my personal opinion about democracy, and I've given you my opinion that sometimes we politicians make decisions that at the time is not popular, but because something is not popular doesn't mean that long term it isn't the right decision. That is our representative democracy that operates in the UK.
Roy Carson from Buckwick Estates. We talk about the process, we talk about democracy, but I woke up on Monday morning to find that Councillor Elliott has made a decision to make the ETRO permanent, and his justifications in that single-member decision were hollow. So I have come away now, and for the week I've been fuming because we have a council gone rogue. They consult, but they don't listen to the reply. Listen, so I'm going to ask you to do two things, if you will. I want you to go back to Parliament, and I want you to ask them if they are going to enforce the guidelines that the DFT published last year on implementing LTNs. And also, if they are going to enforce that, as they said they would, will they then force Baines to roll back not only Sydney, New Sydney Place and Sydney Road, but also Southlands Road? This is the second time that the council haven't listened to the data. The data says most people are opposing their implementation. Will you do that?
So, first of all, the clues in the word guideline. So, the DFT will say to me that they cannot enforce that. They're guiding councils along doing that.
They said they could. In that note, they can enforce it.
I'm happily asking that question to the DFT, and I will write and ask. I can do that, no problem. We can see what the outcome is, but from previous experiences, I cannot see, because the council ultimately is the decision-making power, that the DFT, and for good reasons, the council is autonomous, and we should welcome that. Otherwise, we just have one central government.
No, we have a rogue council.
Well, that is your opinion.
They've gone beyond their remit.
That is your opinion.
Thank you, Rory. Really good question. Thank you. Right.
So mine's the Minster Way, just outside the area affected, and I just don't understand the process. And my question to you is, why, after the consultations have come back and the feedback is that most people do not want this LTN to be made permanent, why are we even having this meeting? Why are we here? Why hasn't this all just been stopped now? You're all democratically elected representatives of us. We've spoken, and we're still not being listened to.
So it's not... It's not my decision. It's the decision of the council, and I have no jurisdiction over the council. I talk to my colleagues, I have expressed my own opinion, but the council has ultimately made a decision the way they have done. I'm here to listen to you. I've also explained when I've been asked about my personal opinion, what my personal opinion is. But the decision is not mine. The decision is a council decision, and they have based it on the criteria they have set out that they want to happen. Less traffic in those areas where people live. That was the criteria. There is less traffic. You're now saying less traffic is not what I want, but that is the criteria on the particular roads that have been created. That criteria has been fulfilled on Sydney Road. Yes. Oh, hang on. Where's the microphone?
Thank you. Thank you. I must add my thanks, Wera, for you coming tonight. That's really good to see you. I wonder what you think of this, though. The build-out of the Sydney Place LTN was complete. The infrastructure was put in as a final product. So £306,100,000 was spent on this, when it could have cost just a few tens of thousands to put in temporary planters. So why, before the trial even started, was the final product actually produced? It doesn't make sense.
So I don't recognise that figure that the only scheme cost 350,000, but I can feed that back and ask that question.
306,000.
306,000.
306.
Yeah, I can ask that question.
Can I just add, in the decision letter, the cost wasn't stated because the councillors now said that they cannot determine the total cost.
No, and I think the figure that you're mentioning is the figure for all the LTNs.
No, this is for...
My name is Steve Campbell. I live on North Road. In the decision letter, the figure of 306,000 was dropped, and it was stated that the cost was not able to be determined. So how can they possibly approve a decision where the cost is not actually determined? I have another point to make actually while I've got the mic. The scheme actually pushes demonstrably traffic towards 2 schools in the area. Thousands of cars displaced to 2 schools. In North Road, we have an extra 1,000 cars a day going up and down past Kes. This is creating a really dangerous environment at 2 schools. And in my opinion, this is not acceptable. How does this conform to a livable neighbourhood?
Again, the response I understand is that it had ultimately no significant effect on the roads surrounding the I can again ask for the direct data for that, and I will.
You might want to just want to draw attention to this statement, which comes from the engagement, stakeholder engagement the council did in their report. This is a quote straight from that. I have a more lengthy quote from the head teacher, which I think everybody can read that. It's very clear that the school feel very concerned about the impact on that, so that's something to take up.
I'm Jackie Sadler, I live at the bottom of North Road as well. What I want to ask is how could it be thought that a robust and impartial survey of the impact of the bollards on the traffic going down the A36 can be undertaken when the A36 is shut?
Asked several times. The data was collected during that week in November when the A36 was not closed. And then people say, well, so as I understand it, and I can follow that argument, the council set out its process with the timelines, and then Highways England decided to close the A36. So the council had no decision-making over that. It was not a deliberate design to do that survey while the A36 was closed. It happens often that the council does something and then utility companies or other agencies make their own decisions on when they close a road because they need to do maintenance works or repair a gas pipe or whatever it is. And the council has no decision over that. Which is why sometimes you see that the road gets resurfaced and then it gets dug up again.
So Vera, I'm just going to add a bit into that point, because the A36 actually has been partly closed, not fully open, since January last year, and the council knew about that beforehand. So it's not been flowing like normal. So, as somebody lives in Barthampton, I know trying to get out of Barthampton Lane is really easy at the moment because the road's closed. And it's been not flowing as normal because there's been multiple traffic lights. So because the council didn't know about that, even though the roads are closed, and that's a different case.
It had no influence on their timescales, because the timescales were set out by and then Highways England comes in. Yeah, that's the explanation for it.
Vera, you've been in Parliament a long time. As I recall, this whole livable neighbourhood thing was a Boris Johnson idea, and there was central government money put in for it. My question, forgive my cynicism, the council have accepted this money. That's why they're going ahead with it.
So again, I was a councillor a long time ago. Getting money and having money as a council is one of our biggest problems. If there is money coming down your end, and you know that a lot of people have also put forward concerns about their neighbourhoods and think that they're speeding, it's not safe, and so on and so forth. And there is a pot of money that is set out that you can spend on addressing these issues. As a council, you would be pretty silly not to accept that money. So, of course, the council has accepted that money and has tried to access that money with a great deal of effort. And we should, again, actually say that's a good thing, not trying to get money when money is available. I would say, personally, it's not a particularly good plan.
Okay, so, Lady Emma.
Good evening. I'll say up front that I don't live in the Sydney Road area, but I do live in just off Julian Road, which is subject to another LTN. What I'd like to ask is the council has justified all these projects by saying it's going to reduce the amount of traffic in Bath overall and encourage walking and and cycling, yet they have produced no evidence that this is happening. Clearly, if you close a single road, or any of the roads you close, they're going to have less traffic. The traffic has just been displaced onto the neighbouring road. They produce no evidence that the overall amount of traffic has been reduced, and yet they have, it seems, against objections of the vast majority of the people living in those areas, gone ahead with them. Why aren't they producing the evidence that the overall amount of traffic in Bath has been reduced, and that it flows better, and that there's been more walking and cycling either in the areas or overall to justify these projects? Thank you.
I hear what you're saying. The evidence of the long-term modal shift is, as it says, it takes a little bit of time for people to adjust to that. I understand from CAS that actually, but it's anecdotal evidence, that 30% more children are now taking a bus. So that is the beginning of a start to a modal shift, and that is exactly where ultimately the council is aiming for. I hear that you're saying we can't use buses because we don't have very good bus services, and that is a very fair argument. But where there is a bus service, 30% more are taking it.
Thank you. Well made, thank you. Lady.
Frances Robertson, Buckhampton Lane. More of a general question here for you. Do you think that the botched implementation of livable neighbourhoods generally is becoming an electoral millstone?
So obviously, if you're calling it botched already, it's a bit of a loaded question, because if something is botched, it's not a particularly good thing. But if you're asking me, do we all reflect on it? I mean, and it is not my decision. I'm here to listen and to sort of give you the answers as best as I can, and you're asking me occasionally about my personal opinion, and I give it to you as frankly as I can. Do I think that if you create a lot of anger, that is a political problem? Well, everybody knows that. But do I think that therefore I should just not do what I think is the right thing to do? And I'm not talking about the schema generally. No, I wouldn't be a politician if I just fall over because people are shouting very loudly. And I give you one example. I introduced in my council, when I was a councillor, alternative reading collections. I had everybody on my doorstep. It was terrible. Maggots, and I saw it through. Yeah, it's 15 years ago now. It worked up in where I was a councillor. They're now collecting the rubbish every 3 weeks because I knew it would make a difference and be able to increase recycling threefold. It was not popular, but long term it was the right decision.
Okay, on to the next one. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Elizabeth Raspberry. I live at the bottom of North Road, just opposite King Edward School. And in the morning, the traffic is a shambles. You have 2 streams of traffic coming, one from Warminster, one down North Road, trying to funnel into one lane at the bottom, and it is shambolic. Also, is it not true that the council have been given this money, readily spend it, but to reinstate what was there, the council's going to have to pay for it themselves. And this is one of the reasons that they don't want to roll back on what they've already done.
Just to clarify that point, is 80% of the funding for livable neighbourhoods comes from the West of England Authority in the CRSDS fund, right? If somebody implements a livable neighbourhood and it is withdrawn, they need to give that 80% back.
So the council can do that, of course. The council can, of course, do that. It's just, as you say, it's what is it, what do you do politically with
Sorry,
it?
actually, could I'll speak without a mic because I've got a battery commander's brave voice. Can I put a question to go back to you, to Parliament, is that the award of those funding of that type of funding and the criteria that if a livable neighbourhood fails, the money has to go back, is actually creating perverse behaviours.
Councillor aware of that. Absolutely no problem.
Good, thank you. Gentleman at the back.
Well, thank you for coming. I do admire you for trying to, like I say, defend the indefensible. I'm personally from Bartwick Estate. I'll just make a point. You said they had to do something. No, they didn't have to do something. Sometimes doing nothing is better than making life worse for the rest of us, which is what... It is such a good idea, and I do irritate Mandy coming on the television telling us we will like it, which I find unacceptable if it's democracy. If it was such a good idea, why did they not flag that up when they were being elected? Because it wasn't on the agenda, it wasn't flagged up as something they were going to do, and then they pretended afterwards that it was, which just was not the case.
So what happened was it was definitely in our local Liberal Democrat manifesto that livable neighbourhoods would be implemented. So it was there. But that is always when West Streeting says we are going to make the NHS better, then he doesn't tell you exactly how he's going to do that. That is all. But it was in the manifesto.
But if you say you're going to introduce LTNs, we assume they're going to be good LTNs that will make life better for us.
Okay, we've got the lady there, and then we've got the lady behind there.
Vera, I feel you're talking to the fit and able. I'm here representing my mum, my 85-year-old blind mother, who had multiple health concerns and who lived at 103 Sydney Place for 56 years until recently when she had to move into a care home. For the last year of her life there, she relied on carers coming 4 times a day, daily district nurses, and it was absolute nightmare. Carers from agencies don't have travel time. They have to drive from vulnerable person to vulnerable person, and often they were late to my mum because of trying to get around the city and trying to find parking places. It was absolutely awful. My mum was housebound. She could not get out at all. So totally dependent upon people coming to her. So first of all, I'd like to ask, how can you expect carers and also medical people, critical medical people, coming to visit our elderly and our vulnerable in these areas? But also, I do want to say that consultation was not a proper one because it was not accessible. The information that went to my mum was not in any accessible format for her. I helped, I advocated for her, and very quickly any of the concerns that she wanted to raise were shut down. So please could you answer my question around being vulnerable and not being able and fit?
Yeah. First of all, of course, protecting the most vulnerable is all our concern and has to be our concern. When was it that your mother could not get support from their carers? Was it before or after the? Was it as a result of the livable neighbourhood was being implemented? Your mother could not, a carer could not come in.
Sorry, when Sydney Place was cut off, my mum lived at 103. I was born in number 79. We know the area incredibly well. So she was at 103, which is right on the corner with the cut-off at the top. So, and also, there was such a problem with carers trying to park. I took that up the council and got told that, there's some bookable parking places a few streets away. Carers haven't got that time, Vera.
No,
that means the impact on my mum. There were shorter times, they could stay longer, going on to other people. So it's a real concern.
Because of the closing of the road, there are now fewer parking spaces.
No. You've got to go right round. And it takes longer. You've got to go right round.
You have no traffic. Again, it takes longer to write to the council, right, to me, tell me exactly what it is that makes it longer in order to create that evidence.
Okay, next question, over here.
Hello, my name is Amanda Digney and I live in St Anne's Way, which is one of the roads that's been most affected by the displaced traffic. I'm a keen cyclist, I cycle every day into work in Bath. And I want to know from you, Wera, what you would say to, I think, the general feeling, which is that the liberal neighbourhoods aren't actually real neighbourhoods. They're generally perceived as being populated by large houses with fewer residents. And the traffic that has been displaced as a result of those elite areas being closed off has been displaced into highly populated neighbourhoods that were livable but are now less so. But very often those streets that are receiving the displaced traffic are much narrower, already have parked vehicles on them, and it makes no sense. Make no sense. It feels incredibly unjust.
The council explains that they have picked those neighbourhoods where people have come forward and wanted a change. I refer back to what the council has told me. I am not the decision maker. I was not the person who picked those areas.
Thank you for just saying that you're going to protect the vulnerable and that we need to as a priority. I am one of the losers. I live right on the corner of Forrester Road and Bedford Road, and every day I am watching pedestrians and cyclists try and navigate a road that now has 3,000 more cars and will have more. I am watching near misses from my window, and my son, who is 12, wanted to come today to ask you why he can't cycle to school any more safely.
So when you live, I mean, I honestly try to understand that. I'm not your local councillor, and you have to talk to your local councillor.
You're here. Thank you for being here when she isn't.
The decision has been called in, and for that reason, councillors really felt it was inappropriate to be here because they need to have.
She said she had other commitments, so it wasn't
but,
she felt.
But since then, the call-in came, and then they shouldn't have been here anyway. So let's accept that. And what I find difficult is if these are colleagues of mine, they're not in the room. So, all that, I know you're angry, but let's try to be respectful. I am here to listen to what you have to say, but it is quite difficult for me if you are sort of saying not particularly respectful things about my council colleagues. I know that you are unhappy, but I cannot accept a meeting where I'm just sort of standing here and you're accusing people who are not in the room. So let's just drop that if we can. I know you're angry, but let's drop that if we can. And I'm sorry if it sounds like it's what you said. Yeah. Let's just go back to your issue. So if you're coming out of Forrester Road, you're saying there's more traffic on Warminster Road because the traffic can no longer...
Not Warminster, yes there is, but Forrester Road and Bedford Road and the other roads that have obviously got to have these cars on, so we can no longer cycle like we used to, we can no longer walk like we used to, and the Greens are now with us. This isn't environmental, this isn't safe. So I'm confused why we had to lose.
So the thing that I can ask for and will ask for is that you continue to monitor so that with this decision, it's not the end of where we monitor where the traffic is going. I hear that Bedford Road particularly has got increased traffic, which is concerning. And if those numbers are really going up and in an unacceptable way, I am sure it needs to be looked at again. Hang on, I cannot make that promise at all. I am just saying I will pass on that concern, and I will ask that you continue to monitor the traffic levels of that displaced traffic.
Good evening, Wera. Nice to see you again, and I think you obviously got the impossible task today. There's absolutely no way you can obviously appease the representatives here, and you're not in charge of LTNs. I'm still bemused as to why no council representative could be here today, because obviously you will have to pass the answers and questions back to the council, and it just causes a completely unnecessary extra element here. But the question I wanted to ask you is, what consideration has been given to the danger that our children have been placed, both at Barthwick St Mary's and at King Edward School, because of the displacement of traffic onto the major road?
The whole purpose of those schemes, as I understand it, is to make it safer, not less safe. So, and that is absolutely what the council wants to achieve. So the continuing monitoring of what is happening is obviously important, and you too, writing in exactly, but also with incidences, with real data, with things that happen, not with what people worry about that happen, and that can sometimes get mixed up. But I get it that I don't want to accuse anybody to say, well, you're telling me something that's not true. But the council is basing their decision, and I've said that when I was asked over the summer, the council is basing its decision on the data that they have available.
Vera, just one last question. I'm going back to start really. I did dig out the information about the original consultation, which was a workshop with 18 people who lived on the road. Would you like the road closed? Was never asked, in fact, and nobody actually came up with the idea of closing the road. What actually came back from the people there was they wanted some slide measures put onto the road, chicanes or something like that, but nobody ever came up to say that in the minutes of that meeting. So from that meeting, which was highly contained within a very small group of people, nobody actually said they wanted the road closed there. So how did that come about actually from that consultation? Well, that's the question I'm asking you.
Yes,
so
I will ask that question. I don't
how
know
did they decide to change what the people are saying is something they want to do?
I will have to answer that question because I was not at the design shop, so I don't know.
Hi, my name is Carmen.
Yeah.
I live on St. John's Road, which is just outside that blue official circle, and we have all the traffic on our road. It is completely backed up, morning and night. It's all been, like, so much of it has been displaced, and it's very frustrating because we are not officially on the map. So anything we have to say isn't taken into consideration, and it's not monitored, and that's unfair.
Remind me again where you live?
St. John's Road, which is residential. We have 2 care homes on the street. We have actually 3 care homes on the street and 2 churches.
Sorry, can I just bring something up? We have been to London for 4 years.
Can't hear.
We've been to London for 4 years on this problem in St. John's Road. With cars which keep mounting the pavement. We have old people being knocked aside. We have the police called out all those 100 times. And actually, you talk about your colleagues. It would be very nice if Man and Rigby could just return our comments about any control.
I mean, Fiona is sitting here. Honestly, we are noting everything down. There's also recording, and the council has asked for it, so they're listening very carefully to what we are discussing tonight. And we are also making notes of what you're raising.
Sorry, very conscious of time, but...
I'm a resident Minster Way. Firstly, appreciation for your coming along tonight. Genuinely appreciate it. The point on consultation about the council, they were invited, and it would be good to consult with the council and to have engagement with them. The point you make on data, I'd requested data and had it refused. And the reason in writing was it was refused because the data was still being collected and still being analysed. and that was very recently, and yet the decision was made. So there's a disassociation there that the council is saying the data was still being collected, but they made the decision. And just to clarify, the 306,000 was confirmed by the council to me that that was the cost of this one LTN. So yeah, it's fine. But thank you.
Okay, again, you can ask that question. I will.
Sorry, just one final question from me about Sequel. I think most people are baffled as to why this particular road was chosen. It's one of the shortest in Bath, it's one of the least densely populated, it's got a park down one side, it's got a hotel. Its emissions are below legal limits, it's got very good safety records. So I think one question I'd ask you to ask people is why this road? There must be much better candidates for these schemes. Of course, we all agree with livable neighbourhood schemes. I don't think people are questioning that as why this one. Second question is, assuming that we get called in, the Liberal Democrat majority are just going to push it back to Mark Elliott. Mark Elliott's not going to change his mind. I think the next step is a public inquiry and judicial review. So what role as our MP can you play in helping us get those next steps implemented?
Judicial process, you have to instigate that. Unfortunately, very often these things are very expensive, they cost money. I cannot interfere into a legal process. That is absolutely not possible for me. So it will have to be driven by the community. You will need to take legal advice on this, and you will get that. But and I'm concerned about, it's not in Bath, but generally, and sometimes it costs a lot of money to get justice. I don't necessarily think that is right. But that is our system. Do I find that democratic? That would be something that I have raised before, that justice is just too expensive for people to get. People can't get legal aid. These are bigger political questions that you're raising, but into that particular process, I cannot interfere once there is a legal process in place.
You supported by inquiry requests, right? So that's not a judicial process, as I understand it. As our MP, our elected representative to represent all of Baines.
But public inquiries
I'm asking you to lead the judicial review. I'm asking you to lend your weight behind the need for one.
So public inquiries are about big national issues, and they are instigated by Parliament, and Parliament would not do a public inquiry into a local issue.
Sorry, the road traffic regulations allow for a public inquiry on enacting a TRO if it is called for by a local authority.
Yeah, but if it's called for by a local authority, so you need the council on side.
So I'm Candy McCabe from Barthampton, and we started this evening with you saying very eloquently that we're looking to improve the traffic flow within the city, improve cycling opportunities and walking. Wouldn't it have been sensible that we all saw a long-term traffic plan for the whole city, a transport system, that we were confident that more buses, a transport solution was coming, or indeed was put in place before these were started? And where is that evidence that we can all see the long-term view about how putting in LTNs is going to improve our lives in the long term? I live in Barthampton, we have very, very few buses. There is no indication that more buses are coming. Surely that should be done first, before we displace traffic onto other roads without a solution.
But the point that you're raising is a very valid one, but to be quite honest, the problem is a wider national problem, that so many things are so disjointed. So our council would love to have the opportunity to create and franchise its own bus services. They can't because the Weka mayor doesn't want them to. The council would love to get money directly from the central government in order to do the things that they want to deliver. It goes via the Becker Mayor and it has got many strings attached to it. If only local authorities, this is a political point, would have more autonomy to actually create its own fortunes, we would be in a much better place. But that is not the problem of my Liberal Democrat colleagues in the council. It's a long-term thing that has evolved, that councils get less and less money, get less and less actual decision-making. They're becoming more and more just a delivery arm for the central government on adult social care, which costs more and more. We all know that this is a problem. And for the things that really involve local communities and making local communities better, the money is shrinking and shrinking. And then councils has to run to different pots and the whole decision is disjointed. I agree with you. It would be lovely, but that is a much bigger national problem. And indeed, those are the things that I can raise in Parliament. And I will.
Okay, I think we've reached the end of the time, I'm afraid, everybody. But can we please give a round of applause for Wera? Really grateful for all of you for the questions you asked and the passion you've shown. I think Wera understands it very clearly. But thank you and enjoy the rest of the evening.